Alrighty, how's it going, everybody? So today I want to discuss the question of symbolism and symbols. Not like musical symbols, but what does the symbol of a red octagon mean? Generally it means stop. Okay, if you're driving a car, stuff like that. Except I particularly want to discuss the question of symbols in and beauty. I was recently watching a news segment done by EWTN on the schism in the German church currently. Right now it's February 2023, and so that there seems to be at least a prelude to a schism, if not actual schism existing de facto within the German synod, kind of their national synod that they're having. And this is mainly over sexual ethics, particularly as involves Q issues. Okay, so those issues of homosexuality, transgenderism, and the like. Now, I don't necessarily want to focus on that in this video. I've done plenty of other videos addressing my thoughts on homosexuality and transgenderism, LGBTQ, all of that. So you can go back and find those. I believe they would be in the 110s, like 100 to 110 area for my episode numberings. But I think if you just type into my channel sexuality or transgenderism, or you look up my social issues playlist, you can find them there. But while I was watching this interview, or this segment, news segment, they were panning and had a bunch of shots of some what would apparently be German chapels and churches. And there were quite blasphemous and sacrilegious things on their altars, particularly gay pride flags on the altar, kind of using them as an altar cloth, which is particularly why I would call that a sacrilegious type of an action. But, doing something like that, putting a gay pride flag, LGBTQ plus whatever pride flag on the altar and using it as a type of an altar cloth, that symbolizes something. One might say, oh, well, no, that's not sacrilegious. It's just a flag. What's the difference? I mean, what does it matter? It's just a piece of cloth with some colors on it. It doesn't matter. And this would be a statement that is rooted in a philosophy that is antithetical to Catholic philosophy. Okay? What a statement like that says when they say, oh, well, it's just a jumble of atoms. What does it matter? It doesn't. Symbolism is all in your head. It's just what you make of it. The same line of thinking says things like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Okay, and that phrase will be key to our discussion today. But I want to argue that Catholic philosophy, and therefore Catholic philosophy which informed Catholic theology, and vice versa, is completely contrasted to that sort of a view about the nature of symbolism. Symbols are not simply constructs of the human mind in order to make a point, or in order to just describe something that we think or that we perceive. A gay pride flag, yes, it is empirically simply a cluster of atoms organized in a certain way, and then it having been manufactured by human beings. Okay, sure, yeah, empirically. But to say something like, well, all that it is this cluster of atoms, is to really have one espousing a type of philosophy that says that all that there is atoms, And if I think a rainbow-colored flag symbolizes something, then that's only connections being made in my brain. And therefore, that's all the value that it has. The symbol only has the amount of value that I give it, okay, is kind of what this philosophy would say. Because in the end, the symbol is simply a construct of the human mind. Now, a Catholic philosophy would acknowledge that yes, of course, a symbol is a construct of the human mind, but that's not all it is. And that's not the reason why it is what it is. Okay? If I see a gay pride flag, yes, there is a reality to the fact that societally human beings have given that flag a meaning that it did not have before, I don't know when the gay flag originated, probably some point in the 1980s or the 1990s, I would venture to guess. It may have been sooner than that, but I would venture to guess it probably wasn't before the 1960s. And so yes, the gay pride flag does have meaning because society gives it meaning. But then you have to ask, well, why did society give it meaning? Okay? Why did society give it meaning? And once it has that meaning, is that meaning independent of what society says of it? All right? At least while said symbol is in use. Because certainly, symbols can go in and out of use. All right? The rainbow throughout history has symbolized many different things. One of which was God's love for mankind through the destruction of the vast majority of humankind with the flood in, with the early chapters of Genesis. I believe it was Genesis 10, I believe, 10 through 12, I want to say. So, the rainbow symbolized something then, and it still holds that symbolism over and above, we would say, the gay pride flag. The LGBTQ community really stole that symbol from us. But, as such, it was, as far as I know, it was never really throughout history, a banner that could be made. I think largely because we did not have the ability to make so many colors in an economical way and put them on a flag. Anyway, I don't think I need to go into that claim too much there because it's not a terribly important one to my argument. But I think I would say this. A symbol may very well be given its meaning initially by society, by groups of human beings or individual human beings. Okay? But as it comes accepted by society, it takes on a meaning that is more real than simply something that was constructed by the human mind. Okay, as a group of human beings acknowledges the reality of a certain symbol, the meaning of a certain symbol, it begins to gain sort of an autonomy all upon its own. Now, yes, again, in the one hand, it is true that the symbol gained its meaning initially from a human being or a group of human beings, but that those human beings gave that symbol that meaning for a reason that was not arbitrary. Okay, for example, the gay pride flag, it symbolizes diversity. Well, what Catholics would consider at least a perverted understanding of diversity, which not only includes rational types of diversity, but also irrational types of diversity, including types of insanity. Okay, which is what we would consider the transgender movement in particular to be, and also the homosexual movement to be a form of maybe not so much insanity as much as disorder, a biological and a psychological disorder, but that largely springs itself from the biological. There's something wrong or odd with the person's attractions. Okay, this is the same thing with pedophilia. There's something wrong biologically with the person's attractions. A normal, healthy human being should not have sexual attraction towards a prepubescent human being. Okay, that's not normal. That's a disorder. Okay, in the same way, homosexuality, a normally functioning biologically functioning human being should not have attractions to the same sex. It makes no sense, biologically speaking, and naturally speaking. And so, by definition, it's irrational. Okay, and then I think the transgender movement really brings it a whole nother level to the point of insanity, where it's not just a disorder that someone needs to to work against their emotions, their initial inclinations, okay, that would be what I would consider to be a disorder. But insanity would be a person has a view of reality which is absolutely not in keeping with reality, to the point where they start lopping off parts of their body and doing things that are utterly detrimental to their own lives, their own biological lives, and their psychological lives. So, I do think there is a very serious distinction in degree between something like homosexuality or pedophilia and transgenderism. I do think that there is a distinction in degree. They're all disorders, but I think transgenderism is a further degree of disorder, to the point of insanity, because of the amount of a break with reality with which it brings. Okay. Now I want to say as a caveat, I'm not trained psychologically in any formal way. Okay, these are just observations that I make, and I think it's perfectly fine for people who are maybe not experts in a field. I'm not an expert in any of these things that I talk about. The only formal education I have is in mathematics and land surveying and like geography, basically. So everything else that I've done has been through self-study. But there's a value in that even though one may not have formal education in something, one is still able to speak on it, I think, if they've done enough study and can prove that they are at least somewhat conversant in the topic. All right. If I was a complete ignoramus of ecology, like somebody who pays absolutely no attention to the workings of the human beings around him, then sure, you would be able to, I think, dismiss my view. And the point is I may not be using all the technical jargon that is important for conveying specific ideas within a formal field of education. But if someone kind of understands what I'm talking about, they can track what I'm talking about, then they can understand my logic for what I'm saying, even though I'm not an expert in that field. Okay. Anyway, apologize for the tangent there. But the question of symbolism, like at what point does a symbol become real for us? Because another thing that I noticed in this news segment with these videos of the German churches and chapels was their crucifixes, or I don't even know if you could consider them crucifixes anymore, but there was one that was like a wire frame, and it like was utterly obscure. It had the cross in it, but then it basically just had like a semicircle for Jesus's head, and then like some lines for his arm. Like it was basically like a stick figure with a semicircle for a head, and the cross itself was just basically lines. It was just made out of metal, and there were no distinguishing features on it. It was. I think it could be assumed that it was some sort of a resurrexifix, which also has really confusing symbolism and attached to it. Okay, really confusing symbolism attached to it that is not theologically coherent. Okay, and I can explain that later, I think. But so that was one of these crucifixes, and then the other one was it was solid, but it looked like it was made out of like metal, but hammered metal, or it could have even been like a stone, chipped stone. And the cross itself was kind of normal, I guess, although it was just the color was odd. It was just this very gray ashen color, the whole thing. The cross was the same color as Jesus on it. It's just a very gray ashen color. And then the corpus on the cross, Jesus, the depiction of Jesus on the cross was, you could tell that it was Jesus. It had a decent amount of detail. It had feet and fingers and hands and toes chiseled out of it. Sorry, I kind of said that backwards, but chiseled out of it. And then it had like basic facial features chiseled out of it, but the eyes were like these hollow sockets. Okay, and it was kind of the absolute opposite of a resurrexifix, I guess I would say. Although I think it was in the stance of resurrexifix, which for those who don't know, a resurrexifix is when they kind of place Jesus as resurrected on the cross. And it's a very odd form of symbolism. I mean, it doesn't make coherent sense with Catholic theology. Like, Jesus did not rise on the cross. This was a temporal thing that happened. There were two different events. It was not one singular event that occurred. It happened at two places in time and in locality. Okay, so to put Jesus resurrected on the cross, the symbolism is to, I guess, to emphasize really the resurrection over, and to a certain extent that is true. You know, the crucifixion in a certain way was a means to an end, but in a certain way also it was not a means to an end. It was an end in of itself for the sake of teaching us how to suffer, and to know that God himself suffers with us and we suffer with him. Okay, a resurrexifix tells us that oh, your sufferings, we're just going to kind of cover those, cover your pain, cover your suffering, and it'll all be okay because the resurrection's coming. All right, we'll just kind of move past our suffering and just focus on the resurrection. Okay, but that's it's almost like a utopian idea that we would be able to only focus upon the eschaton, the last times, the resurrection and final glory, without being aware of our present situation in life, which, you know, has suffering constantly. That there is no way in life to escape suffering. There's no way. You can't do it. Even if you have everything you could ever want, suffering will find you in that. Either psychological suffering or physical suffering or both, or spiritual suffering, or, you know, you name it. You can't get rid of your suffering in this life. Okay, so those are just some of the things that I would say are wrong with the symbol of the resurrexifix. There are many more. You know, it downplays the sacrificial nature of the Mass. You know, when a resurrexifix is put in a church where Mass is said, right? It downplays the sacrificial nature of the Mass, which has been a huge problem over the last 60 years in the Catholic Church. Is really a Protestantization of the way that we view the Mass, viewing it more as a supper than a sacrifice, or maybe even it's not just a matter of emphasis. Maybe it's, you know, some people think that the sacrifice thing, oh, well, we've moved past that. It's all about the supper now, you know. Union with Christ without the cross. It's basically what this is. It's heaven without life. It's heaven without the cross. You can't have heaven without the cross, people. It doesn't work. You're skipping a necessary step. It's impossible. At some point, at least, you're going to die. And that's going to cause you great suffering. Hopefully, you will have suffered through your life enough and been trained enough in the way of the cross that you will be able to persevere through that final test of death, embrace the suffering as Jesus did, and be resurrected through it. But we're not resurrected in spite of our suffering. We're resurrected through our suffering in the same way that Jesus was. He could have very well not have died. He could have snapped his fingers and there wouldn't have even been a need for his to resurrect. But, you know, I think on the one hand, that's true that God could have snapped his fingers. But on the other hand, it would have been, he would have the power to do it, but I think it wouldn't be within his nature to do it because of justice and also because of mercy, which justice and mercy are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. If you have too much mercy, you have, like, I don't even know what you would call it, but if you have too much mercy, you have like a type of person who just lets somebody do whatever they want. Okay, you have like too much mercy is what creates spoiled children and people who don't know how to suffer, basically. Too much justice creates a hardened individual who will, you know, potentially treat others in the same way without mercy, but it could also lead the person to just collapse in despair. Okay, what I'm getting at here, guys, and I know that I'm kind of hopping off my last train of thought, but I want to say this because I'm running out of time. What I'm saying here is that symbolism means something. It's not just a construct of our minds. Okay, an individual symbol maybe, at least at the beginning, but over time it takes upon a reality of itself, and that reality lives on apart from its creator. Okay, not in the way of like a living being. Okay, symbols aren't living, but they are real. Okay, they do mean something independent of what we think of them oftentimes. Especially, and I think this is where the gay flag would differ from the crucifix. A symbol that represents a particular event in history, okay, like the crucifix, it literally represents something real at that point, and its meaning is literally real. And so to do something like to mold it in a way to where it's only wireframe and it barely represents the actual event is to not convey the reality of that event. It's to make the event itself symbolic or mythical. All right. And that's, I think that really gets at the heart of the issue of this sort of 1970s like idea about architecture and beauty. This like, it's almost like an over symbolization of things to where they no longer mean anything. The what is his name? Jackson Pollock paintings. It's just splatters on a canvas. It does not mean anything at that point. It's not art. It's art because somebody calls it art. But just because you call something a name does not make it what it is. It is something dependent of what you call it. All right, this is the crux of the difference between a realist metaphysical philosophy and a nominalist metaphysical philosophy. If you want more definitions of that, go back to my very, very early episodes and listen to my episodes on nominalism and metaphysical realism. Okay, a true Catholic understanding of symbolism is rooted in a realist metaphysics. All right, that's basically what I want to get at, and it means that symbols, particularly symbols that represent real events, okay, or real people, statues of saints, the statues of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the crucifix, what have you, churches themselves, stained glass windows. These things should be realistic enough to represent the person or the event that actually happened. Otherwise, they're devoid of meaning. All right, thank you.